Today, we remember and celebrate the life of a very dear colleague, Dr. Shaun Gravestock, who died sadly in January of this year from the complications of COVID-19 infection. Shaun spent much of his career working in London services and was well known among colleagues in the city. However, Shaun was a big presence in the faculty and became very well known among colleagues across the country. I was very touched by the many expressions of sympathy I received from members in the UK, in Ireland, and also in Australia. Such was the impression Shaun left on people. And today, 4 colleagues will pay their tributes to a man who contributed so much to the specialty and the lives of people with intellectual disability. So in addition to the tributes we shall hear now, I also suggest that you write your own tributes in the chat box, which you are welcome to share with your colleagues too. So I invite now Dr. Karen Bretherton to share her memories of Shaun and the life he led. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Ken. Before I start today, I just wanted to thank Shaun's husband, Darren Ward, who kindly sent me these photographs of Shaun, which I'm sure you will all agree show his character and great spirit. And he also spent a lot of time talking to me about Shaun's life in preparation for today. What I want to do is really to talk about Shaun, but also to give you some of my personal thoughts and memories of Shaun. So his early life was in Durham. He undertook his medical training at Newcastle University, graduating in 1985, and completed his pre-registration house officer jobs in Durham. He was accepted onto the St George's Psychiatry rotation in London, and it was here that he met many inspirational colleagues from within our faculty. He continued his training, his senior registrar training in psychiatry of intellectual disability, and then on completion of his first post was in Enfield. But Shaun always said that he wanted his first substantive post as a consultant to be back in the northeast of England, and he was appointed consultant up in the Northgate and Prudder Trust in 1993, looking after the patients in Northumberland and inpatient unit in Northgate Hospital. Shaun and Darren missed their life back in London, and they moved back in 1997, and he was a consultant psychiatrist in Greenwich for the Oxley's Trust for 11 years, then moved to consultant post at the Maudsley, North East London, and finally the East London and City Trust as a consultant forensic intellectual disability psychiatrist. Shaun enjoyed the academic roles within his work, and he authored many papers and book chapters, and his speciality areas were eating disorders in intellectual disabilities, low secure services, group therapy and service redesign. He regularly presented lectures and workshops at the intellectual disability conferences and was known by all in the speciality. Shaun was an inspirational teacher and trainer, and he inspired many trainees to join the speciality due to his enthusiasm, commitment and desire to improve mental health services and lives of people with intellectual disabilities in his care. He led by example with his detailed assessments, management plans, time for the person, their family and their carers. Shaun was the reason I joined the speciality. I first met him when I was a registrar in Guy's, and he was the senior registrar working for Professor Burras. And I must admit that 6 months was an amazing experience, particularly as I had to share an office with Shaun, and it's very difficult to concentrate when Shaun's around. I'm very grateful for the teaching, encouragement and support he gave to me throughout my training. All of you who know Shaun know that he would really liven up a conference. When I got to a conference, I would look forward to seeing him. If he wasn't visible immediately, it wasn't long before you could hear where he was. He would sit writing copious, illegible notes, nodding enthusiastically, always asking interesting and insightful questions, however esoteric the lecture. He would enjoy the social side of conferences, entertaining all late into the night with his stories and at times outrageous comments. For anyone who travelled a long way on a train with Shaun, you knew he would entertain you, but also the whole carriage for the length of the journey. And we never managed to work on the train despite claiming that we were going to. Shaun was a great advocate for patients, colleagues and services. He never tired of making his point when he knew he was right and ensuring the best outcome for all. He showed such commitment and remained determined to do his best for all despite lack of resources and time. He embraced life, family, work and friendship with great warmth and enthusiasm. Shaun retired in March 2020 and was looking forward to a change of pace in life and new challenges. He was undertaking training in group analysis, assessments with eating disorders, and had recently joined the Child and Intellectual Disability Psychiatry Network. In his retirement, he'd managed to complete the revisions of his MD, titled Eating Disorders in Adults with Learning Disabilities, Prevalence Types, and Etiological Associations. This was an MD he'd started when he was up in Northumberland. He'd become a bit disillusioned and put it to one side. And he decided in retirement this was the time to complete it, which he did. Shaun was a devoted husband to Darren, whom he'd met in 1988, and father to Patrick. He was looking forward to the time he could take his exciting planned retirement holidays with Darren, which were all postponed due to the pandemic. Shaun contracted COVID-19 and became acutely unwell with pneumonia and died on the 9th of January 2021. He was awarded his MD posthumously on the 12th of February 2021. He will be sadly missed by myself and I'm sure all of you who knew him, and he'll be a great loss to our faculty. Thank you. I'll hand over to Tom.
As Karen has said, and much of what I have to say is really adding footnotes to Karen's account, fleshing it out a bit. Shaun was very much of a northeast, growing up in Durham, Newcastle, medical school. So after southern psychiatric training, he came back to us for his first consultant post, joining people like Ken Day and Greg O'Brien at Northgate Hospital. And at the time, I was working at the sister hospital, Prado, at a time when we were in prolonged and dithering managerial merger. So there are times when I saw much of Shaun, and other times when we were in two very separate services. Shaun took on quite a generous helping of Northgate's community and psychiatric services, and the inpatient service included a couple of units that were to be dedicated to autism, for which Shaun developed an enthusiasm which was to last. Later on, he joined our autism CPD group. When Shaun left, I inherited the autism units, so that besides knowing him as a fellow consultant, I came to know him through his patients, their families, and the staff. And I found, besides the obvious front of a very alive and quite intrusive person at times, he was also a man who was warm, caring, very concerned, very outspoken, and with a strong sense of justice. This formed a mix which would sometimes boil over as Shaun questioned some element of a service or practice. He'd speak in tones of outraged reason, kind of rhetorical style, which had echoes of Frankie Howard. And he'd point out not only that the emperor had no clothes, but that nudity was illegal and it was even unfashionable. I found it infuriating because it was putting an emotional spin on quite reasonable arguments and questions. But I found also that although Shaun's points were very simple, the context was quite complex. It was difficult to give an adequate, off-the-cuff answer. So it was only afterwards, as I sort of settled, that I'd realized that Shaun had a point, and it was actually myself I was getting upset with, for I should have seen the problem before Shaun highlighted it. Certainly wasn't to say Shaun was always right, but over time it helped me see my working world rather differently. And going back to him, I found he was someone I could try ideas out on, and was safe. He wouldn't make me feel silly. So in this way, he became one of my teachers. I wasn't close to Shaun, but Shaun was close to the Northeast, and so this relationship continued even after Shaun left, after a relatively few years. He was very much a formative part of my world, and I miss him. That the faculty is holding this tribute to him is very unusual, and it shows that many others also valued him and miss him. And that's really all there is to say. Shaun brought life to address issues and coloured in the black and white of a professional job.
Thank you, Tom. And now ask Andrew Flynn to share his memories of Shaun with us.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Everyone here will be remembering Shaun in different ways. I'm sure this event would even have been in his diary. And although he'd officially retired from the NHS not long before, I think Shaun had made it clear that he was by no means planning on a quiet life of gardening and golf. In the months before he died, he'd been in touch with me and with some of you as well, perhaps, about setting up groups for his training as a group analyst. I was certainly expecting to see more of him than I had for a time. My own recollections of Shaun are personal as well as professional, from our time as colleagues in Oxley's when he was the consultant in Greenwich, where basically he gave me my first proper job as a consultant. As recollections, they have a randomness to them. They jump around in time, follow no sequence, fall out a bit differently each time I try to pin them down. I think Shaun would say that really these things are best told in convivial company over pints of beer, somewhere where they can be given the room they need to circulate and be properly embellished. His preference too would have been for the occasion to end as raucously as it had begun somberly. But for now it needs to be like this. I remember him from before we worked together, in the intimidating and enthralled way of many trainees, as I still was then, at my stage. The person in the room at conferences like this, whom it was impossible to miss. One of those individuals who gives an occasion its substance and collective encounters their charge. Charismatic, mercurial, without regard, he was by turns booming and considerate, ebullient and serious, a consummate performer for his own account, and a generous and enthusiastic advocate for the accounts of others. I remember the first words he directed at me personally, delivered as he bowled out from behind a loudly closed door, as all his doors were, except for when they were being vigorously thrown open, when I came to visit to find out more about the job advert. So you're thinking of working here then, are you? It was somewhere between a welcome, a challenge, and a provocation. Under the circumstances, it would have been difficult to say anything other than yes. Of course, they're all mad here, you know, he said, jerking his thumb back at the door, still quivering in its frame. I remember Ken Courtenay, perhaps mindful of my sensitive nature at the time, saying later, "I'll give you a year. as long as that. In the end, Shaun and I worked together for almost a decade. I remember someone telling me how, as a student, Shaun had been the lead singer in a punk band called Spit. I didn't question the source. I have absolutely no idea if this is true. It definitely sounded and still sounds like it should be true. Even if it isn't, when you become your own legend, such myths have a habit of sticking to you. Let's call it true. I remember Shaun showing me the ropes, and because at heart he was a trainer and deeply proud of our speciality, making sure I understood them and didn't mess them up. What I know about swearing and facing down nonsense is partly down to Shaun. More importantly, what I know about standing up for those without power of their own, I learned from him also. Little things, like the frenetic one-finger typing of emails, each keystroke like a jab to someone's ribs. He must have gotten through a lot of keyboards. On his desk were towers of papers, always teetering, never quite falling. Gravity somehow worked differently in his office to how it did in mine next door. As I say, bits and pieces. Shaun is not a man suited to the past tense, and it's hard to talk of him as not still in our company. I worked with him, as I said, for close to a decade, but saw him only occasionally after he left us at Oxley's. The last time was when I visited the John Howard Centre 2 years ago. Time changes most of us, but Shaun, I have to say, looked, sounded, and acted almost exactly the same as he always had. It was as if even time didn't dare to interrupt him. The idea, I think, would have appealed to his sense of the absurd. So that'll do for now. The rest, in the spirit of his memory, we should save for the bar. And thanks for that, and I'll pass over to Ian.
Hello.
Thanks, Ian. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. My name's Ian Hall. I worked with Shaun for quite a long time. I'm delighted to be asked to talk about him today. We were near contemporaries, and I've got so many memories of them of Shaun. I would just like to share a few of them. I think my first memory is at the Swallow Hotel in Bristol at an event such as this. It was the first of these conferences I went to many years ago, and I have an abiding memory when I was in the lobby of Shaun just bursting through the doors of the hotel and just obviously knew everyone, saying hello to everyone, incredibly enthusiastic, all guns blazing, you might say. And then I was thinking, well, maybe this is the specialty for me. This looks an exciting specialty to be in. And people have said how he was at those conferences, and I always remember him putting his hand up all the time, asking questions all the time, which is something I get teased about, but I'm sure Shaun was much better at asking lots of questions than I was. And he was, of course, we've heard, an incredible raconteur, and actually had this incredible knowledge about the history of the specialty, and talked about, you know, the greats of the past, like Professor Joan Bicknell at St George's, and how she went to the High Court. He went with her, doing like really important cases on best interest that were the sort of underpinned the later Mental Capacity Act. But he would, of course, always colour his stories with exactly what she was wearing. Maybe some idiosyncratic clothes she wore, the sandwiches falling out of her pocket, and all that sort of thing. So he's incredibly entertaining to listen to, and but he was also very academic, and he was we've heard about his research. He was also secretary of this Penrose Society we had, which was a meeting for researchers in learning disability. I remember going to one meeting in Manchester. We'd actually both applied for the same consultant jobs when he applied for the Greenwich job, and him, I just remember him being very mature about it, and certainly said, "May the best man win" for that. And of course he did win, and he did get that job, as we've heard, and he had a great time in Oxley's with Andrew. He was also doing a lot of leadership as well for quite some time. He was chair of the London Consultants meeting, and really put us on the map and made sure that you know, we were working together in terms of developing services. An incredible act, double act with Adrian Regan that many people will remember, a very glamorous consultant from working in Harrow. He also worked a lot with the college, and he was really in the vanguard of our work, trying to engage with carers at the college. And it was so helpful to have someone of Shaun's enthusiasm involved in that, and that was an amazing piece of inspirational work that he did. That he actually eased off on his college stuff, I think, when he was adopting Patrick, and for me that was an amazing thing to do, because he was really in the vanguard of him, Darren, of gay men adopting, and Shaun, you know, just approached it with his absolute typical, you know, no one's going to stop him from doing anything that he thinks is right, and of course that was an immense success. So I was delighted when Shaun applied for one of our jobs in East London, and I remember him at interview, and you know, just he's so good at winning people over, and you know, presenting a vision and having that really sort of clear thinking of where we should go. So it was delightful to have him back and to be working closely with him. And you know, he was very innovative there as well. And I remember one of our trainees on the training scheme talking about the men's group that he'd done with Shaun. So men's group in a forensic unit is quite a challenging thing to do, but that, you know, Shaun is always up for these challenges. He also joined our CPD peer group, and our peer group's got these two very esteemed professors in it. I won't say who they are, but he was very good in this peer group, challenging people, making people think differently about cases, really advocating for people with intellectual disability. So he was we have very fond memories, all of us in the peer group, of Shaun, and have obviously discussed him a lot actually since he died. He was also very brave at the John Howard Centre, because the John Howard Centre, people might know, is a big forensic unit in East London, staffed by forensic psychiatrists. And Shaun came from more of the intellectual disability background, and he was great in challenging some of the sort of assumptions that you get in forensic units, and that people have to stay for a very long time, and you know, community services can't cope. And he was really good advocate for making sure people only stayed as long as they need to, and that community services stepped up to the challenge to support people coming out. Yeah, we also talked to him at the barring conferences, and that's another abiding memory. The last conference I remember him at is the one in Dublin, and him just sitting at the bar on a bar stool with this whole audience around him, giving anecdote after anecdote, and you know, and just being an inspiration to trainees. I actually changed my job at ELT in the summer, and I had a leaving due from the job I was doing in Tower Hamlets. I invited Shaun, although he'd left ELT by then, but I thought it would be good for him to come if he wanted to. And he was certainly the most enthusiastic. I sent an email to about 100 people, and Shaun must have sent 10 or 20 reply all the emails saying how enthusiastic he was about coming to the leaving do, even though this was a bit of a dodgy leaving do because it was in the middle of the pandemic. So he really bigged that up for me. So I was very grateful for that. And then actually at the do, of course, he was this immense hit, you know, just again, you know, being inspirational and having all these tales, talking a lot about the caravan that him and Darren had bought in the Isle of Sheppey, you know, giving all the Dickens references about Magwitch, inviting lots of people to come to the caravan and that, and just being an immense hit. And so many people there didn't know him, and they all came up to me after to say, who was that person? It was so interesting, you know, such a great person. And that, you know, that's the last time I saw him, and that's an immense good memory to take away. You know, I've said many times he was inspirational, and he absolutely was. But in a way, the best thing about him, was such a great advocate for people with learning disabilities, always on their side. And I think we're really all really going to miss him.
Thank you to Ian, Andrew, Tom, and Karen. Well, what do you say after that? Such great descriptions of Shaun Gravestock, a real value to the specialty. Personally, I remember Shaun at meetings too, and especially as chair of various meetings, you could always rely on Shaun to fill in the gaps, to fill in any silences that might arise during the question and answers after any session. Very reliable, very insightful, and very illuminating in what he would say to us. I always enjoyed Shaun's company, and similar to Karen, spending time with him on a train journey, for example, or just meeting at a faculty conference. And of course, being in London, I would see a bit more of him through our own professional meetings. It's interesting, really, because I was thinking in the past about my connections with Shaun, and then I remember that actually before I came into psychiatry, I met Shaun back in 1988 at a party, and little did I know at the time that in fact he would be quite an influence on me within the faculty, and he led the way, as others have said, in our thinking. So in that way, my connection with Shaun has gone back a long way, and for which I really appreciate. And as others have said, actually, he has enriched our lives so much over the years, and for which we are truly grateful. Especially his connection with carers and with people with intellectual disabilities as well, as a huge advocate. So just turning to the chat, Kath Bright has mentioned how he is so illuminating and an illustrious person as well, and who will be sadly missed. And Alla expressing her own thoughts about Shaun, because Alla worked closely with Shaun when she was a trainee. The patients and faculty will be missing your passion, your enthusiasm, unwavering sense of justice, and fight for inequality and discrimination. I learned from you and with you. I will remember you and will carry on your passion and commitment to the faculty. We will carry on advocating on behalf of vulnerable people. You will always be loved, remembered, and sorely missed. Fly away, Shaun, with love, Alla. Such touching messages that some which I have received over the last few months. So with that, I just want to draw the tributes to a close, and we shall now move on to our program for today.